Admiral Zexthara stood on the bridge of his flagship watching his homeworld burn. The blue crystal cities that had stood for 1,000 years were now nothing but ash and smoke. His people were gone. All of them. The enemy ships hung in space, like giant metal beasts. Each one was the size of a small moon, covered in dark armor that seemed to eat light itself. They had come without warning 3 days ago. Now there was nothing left of Kethmora Prime but a dead rock spinning in the void. "Admiral, we're getting reports from the Vega system," his communications officer said. Her voice shook as she spoke. "The Valorian Republic, they're gone too. All 12 of their worlds. The enemy consumed everything." Zexthara closed his 4 eyes and tried to stay calm. The Valorians had been the strongest military force in the galaxy. Their energy weapons could cut through anything. If they had fallen in just 2 days, what hope did anyone else have? "How many ships do we have left?" he asked. 733, sir. But many are damaged. The civilian ships are packed with refugees from 15 different worlds. 700 ships. Once that would have been a mighty fleet. Now it felt like nothing against the horror they faced. The enemy had thousands of those massive ships, and more kept coming through the strange rifts they tore in space. On the main screen, he watched one of the enemy vessels approach a small mining station. The station had been abandoned hours ago, but the enemy ship still extended long metal arms toward it. The arms ended in hungry mouths that began to eat the station piece by piece. Metal, plastic, air, everything disappeared into those terrible mouths. "They're not just destroying," Zexthara whispered. "They're eating everything." His tactical officer, a young Kethmori named Valsin, looked up from his console. "Sir, we're getting emergency signals from the hive colonies. They say the enemy has reached their home cluster. 5 billion insectoids are trapped on their breeding worlds. 5 billion. Zexthara had seen the reports from other systems. The enemy didn't just kill. They consumed every living thing, every piece of technology, every scrap of metal and stone. They left behind empty space where worlds used to be. "What about the Ethereal Council?" he asked. The Ethereals were beings of pure thought. Surely they could fight creatures like this. "Gone, sir." "The enemy. It seems to eat thoughts, too." "The Council's home dimension has been sealed off. We can't reach them." Zexthara felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Ethereals had existed for millions of years. They had guided the galaxy through countless wars and disasters. If even they had fallen, then perhaps nothing could stop these monsters. "Admiral," Valsin called out, "something's happening to the enemy ships." On the screen, the massive enemy vessels began to change. Their dark armor shifted and flowed like liquid metal. New weapons emerged from their hulls. Weapons that looked exactly like Valorian energy cannons. "They're adapting," Zexthara realized with horror. "They're not just eating our worlds. They're learning from them, getting stronger." A communication signal came through from the flagship of the Valorian survivors. Admiral Texandra's face appeared on the screen. She was one of the few Valorians who had escaped when their homeworlds fell. "Zexthara, we need to talk," she said. "My science teams have been studying these creatures. We found something in our oldest archives, something about a war like this that happened before." "Before? When?" 50,000 years ago. "There are records of creatures called the Devourers. They consumed everything in their path until some alliance of species managed to trap them in another dimension." Zexthara felt a spark of hope. "If they were trapped before, maybe we can do it again." "Who were these species? Are any of them still around?" Texandra's face grew dark. "That's the problem. The records are incomplete. Most of the species involved are gone or forgotten. But there's mention of something called the Sealed Compact, a treaty signed by the survivors to watch for the Devourer's return." "Who signed it?" "Many species we know. The old Kethmori Empire, the first Valorian clans, the ethereal ancestors. But there's one name we don't recognize. They're listed as the Terrans. The records say they were key to the original victory." Zexthara had never heard of any species called Terrans. In all his years of studying galactic history, the name had never appeared in any database or archive. Could they still exist somewhere? He asked. "Unknown," But Zexathara, we're running out of time. The enemy is moving toward the core worlds. If they reach the galactic capital, the last of our governments will fall. We need to find these Terrans or anyone who might know how to stop the Devourers. Another officer interrupted them. Admirals, we're detecting massive enemy movement. They're massing for an attack on the Centauri cluster. If that falls, they'll have a clear path to the core. Zexathara made a decision. Send out a message on all frequencies. Use the old emergency protocols from the sealed compact. If these Terrans still exist, maybe they'll hear us. What should the message say? Valson asked. Tell them the compact is invoked. Tell them the Devourers have returned and billions are dead. Tell them we need help. As the message went out into space, Zexathara looked at the tactical display. Red dots showed enemy positions across dozens of star systems. Each dot represented millions of those terrible ships, and behind each ship was the consumed remains of entire worlds. The evacuation fleets were moving toward the galaxy's edge, carrying what remained of dozens of civilizations, children who would never see their home worlds again, families torn apart by horror beyond imagination, scientists and artists and teachers, all fleeing from an enemy that consumed knowledge itself. Sir, the communications officer said quietly, we're getting a response. From who? Unknown. The signal is coming from the outer rim from a sector we've never explored. They're using old compact frequencies. Zexathara's hearts began to beat faster. Put it through. The message was short and simple, transmitted in the ancient mathematical language used in the oldest treaties. Message received. We remember the compact. We are coming. For the first time in months, Zexathara allowed himself to hope. Somewhere, in the darkness, someone had answered their call. Someone remembered the ancient alliance that had saved the galaxy once before. He just prayed they would be enough to do it again. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking coffee in his small cabin when the strange signal came through. The UES Defiance had been exploring the outer rim for 6 months, mapping new star systems and looking for signs of life. It was quiet work, boring, most of the time. Jake liked it that way. Captain to the bridge, came the voice over the intercom. We're getting something weird. Jake put down his coffee and made his way to the bridge. The Defiance was humanity's first real deep spaceship, built to explore beyond the solar system. She wasn't much to look at, but she was fast and reliable. What do you have? Jake asked as he sat in the captain's chair. Lieutenant Commander Amy Richards, his communications officer, looked confused. Sir, we're getting a signal from somewhere in the core systems, but it's not like anything we've ever heard before. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled with static, then a voice came through. But it wasn't human. The sounds were musical, almost like singing. But the words were completely alien. Can we translate it? Jake asked. Dr. Lisa Hayes, the ship's science officer, was already working at her station. I'm trying, sir. The signal is using mathematical patterns. It might be some kind of universal language. Lisa had been studying alien languages for years, even though humanity had never met any aliens. She had developed theories about how different species might communicate. Now those theories were being put to the test. Got something, Lisa said after 20 minutes. It's rough, but I think the message says something about a compact being broken, and they're asking for help. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Aliens. We're really hearing from aliens. There's more, Lisa continued. They mentioned something called Devourers, and they say billions are dead. The bridge fell silent. Jake had been in the military for 15 years, but he had never heard anything like this. If the translation was right, they were listening to a distress call from another species, a species that was dying. Send a message to Earth Command, Jake ordered. Tell them we've made contact with alien life, and tell them it sounds like they're in trouble. The message took 6 hours to reach Earth. When the reply came back, it was from Admiral Ben Taylor himself, the head of Earth's Space Forces. Captain Morrison, you are ordered to maintain your position and continue monitoring the alien transmissions. We're sending you all available data on similar signals. Do not attempt contact until further orders. Over the next few days, more signals came through. Each one was more desperate than the last. Lisa worked around the clock to improve the translations. The picture that emerged was terrifying. An enemy called the Devourers had returned after being imprisoned for thousands of years. They were consuming entire worlds, eating everything in their path. Dozens of alien species were being wiped out. The survivors were fleeing to the edge of the galaxy. "Captain," Lisa said on the fourth day, "I've found something important. The aliens keep mentioning something called the Sealed Compact. It was some kind of treaty signed long ago to keep the Devourers imprisoned. Who signed it? Multiple species. But here's the interesting part. One of the signers is listed as the Terrans. That's us, Captain. Somehow humanity was part of this ancient alliance." Jake couldn't believe it. "That's impossible. We've never been to space before. We've never met aliens." "I know it sounds crazy, but the evidence is right here. The aliens are calling for the compact to be honored. They're asking the Terrans for help." Jake sent another message to Earth. This time the response was different. Admiral Taylor ordered the Defiance to return to Earth immediately. When Jake asked why, the Admiral's reply was brief. "We've found something you need to see." The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks. When the Defiance docked at Luna Station, Jake was met by Admiral Taylor and a woman he didn't recognize. "Captain Morrison, this is Dr. Amy Foster," the Admiral said. "She's our top expert on ancient history. What she's discovered changes everything." Dr. Foster led them to a secure briefing room. On the table were photographs of stone tablets covered in strange symbols. "These were found in ruins beneath the Sahara Desert," she explained. "The site is over 50,000 years old. We've been studying it for months, but we couldn't translate the symbols. Until now." She pointed to one of the tablets. "These symbols match the mathematical language in the alien transmissions. Perfectly." Jake stared at the ancient stones. "You're saying humans knew about aliens 50,000 years ago?" "More than that. These tablets tell the story of a great war against creatures, called the Devourers. Humanity fought alongside other species to imprison them. We were part of a galactic civilization. What happened to us? Why don't we remember?" Dr. Foster's face was grim. "Something went wrong. The tablets speak of a great catastrophe that destroyed most of the Alliance. The survivors were scattered. Some species forgot their past completely. Others, like us, lost all memory of the stars and fell back into primitive life." Admiral Taylor spoke up. "The aliens out there are calling on us to honor an ancient treaty. They think we still remember how to fight the Devourers." "But we don't," Jake said. "We've forgotten everything." "Have we?" Dr. Foster pulled out another tablet. "Look at this. It's a star map showing the locations of ancient weapons and technologies. If we can find even one of these sites, we might be able to help." Jake looked at the map. It showed dozens of star systems, with symbols marking important locations. One symbol was very close to Earth. "There," he said, pointing to the symbol. "That's the Alpha Centauri system. We could reach it." Admiral Taylor nodded. "President Walsh has authorized a full response. We're building a fleet to answer the alien distress call. Captain Morrison, you'll command the first ship to make contact." "What about the Devourers? If they're as dangerous as the aliens say, we might be flying into a death trap." "Maybe. But 50,000 years ago, humanity helped save the galaxy. Now it's our turn to try again." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Somewhere out there, alien species were dying. They were calling for help from the Terrans, from humanity. They were calling on an ancient promise made by his ancestors. "When do we leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow. The UES Defiance will be joined by 2 other ships. Your mission is to find the alien survivors and learn everything you can about the Devourers. Then we'll decide how to help." That night, Jake stood on the observation deck of Luna Station, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among those lights, aliens were fighting for their lives. They were counting on humanity to remember who they used to be. Jake didn't know if they could do it. Humans had forgotten their past, lost their technology, spent 50,000 years learning to be human again. But maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed, Maybe being human was enough. The next morning, the Defiance launched toward Alpha Centauri. In the ship's hold were the ancient tablets, humanity's only clue to their forgotten past. On the bridge, Jake looked at the stars ahead and made a promise. "We're coming," he said quietly. "We remember the compact." Earth changed overnight. Every factory that made cars started making spaceships instead. Every steel mill that built buildings began forging armor plating. Every person who knew how to weld or wire or build was suddenly working for the military. Colonel Rick Barnes stood in the biggest shipyard on Luna, watching workers swarm over the skeleton of humanity's first real warship. The UES Hammer was 3 times bigger than the Defiance, packed with weapons and armor. It wasn't pretty, but it was built to fight. "How many more can we build?" asked General Kate Sullivan as she joined him at the observation window. 20 by the end of the month, Rick replied. 50 by the end of next month. The President has ordered every resource we have to go into shipbuilding. Kate nodded. She was in charge of the entire war effort, and the pressure was crushing. Every day brought new alien distress signals. Every day more worlds went silent. The enemy was getting closer to the core systems where most of the alien survivors had gathered. "What about weapons?" she asked. "That's where Dr. Tony Chen comes in. His team at the research station has been studying the alien data we received. They think they found something useful." Dr. Chen was waiting for them in the Luna Research Station's main lab. The walls were covered with alien symbols and star charts. In the center of the room sat a strange device that hummed with energy. "General Sullivan, Colonel Barnes," Tony said as they entered. "I think we've cracked the Devourer problem." "Show us," Kate said. Tony activated a holographic display. It showed one of the massive enemy ships, the ones the aliens called Devourer Titans. The ship was covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb all light. "The aliens have been trying to fight these things with energy weapons," Tony explained. "Lasers, plasma cannons, particle beams. But look what happens." The hologram showed alien ships firing at the Devourer. Their weapons hit the dark armor and simply disappeared, absorbed without doing any damage. "The armor adapts," Tony continued. "It learns from each attack and becomes immune to that type of weapon. That's why the aliens keep losing. Their best weapons become useless after the first few shots." "So how do we beat them?" Rick asked. Tony smiled. "We don't use energy weapons. We use something much simpler. Kinetic energy, big chunks of metal moving very fast." He changed the hologram to show a human ship firing what looked like oversized bullets at a Devourer. The projectiles punched through the dark armor like it was paper. The armor can adapt to energy, but it can't change the laws of physics. Enough kinetic force will destroy anything. And we've got something the aliens don't have. "What's that?" Kate asked. "Nuclear warheads. We load them into kinetic projectiles and fire them at near light speed. The impact alone will crack their armor. The nuclear explosion will finish the job." Kate felt a spark of hope. For the first time since this crisis began, humanity might actually have an advantage. "How soon can we test this?" she asked. "The weapons are ready now. We just need ships to carry them." Over the next month, Earth shipyards worked around the clock. The new human warships were nothing like the elegant alien vessels they had seen in the data files. They were thick, blocky, covered in armor plating. Each one carried enough nuclear-tipped projectiles to level a city. Captain Jake Morrison had returned from his mission to the alien survivors with grim news. He had found Admiral Zexathara's fleet at the edge of the galaxy, but most of the alien ships were damaged beyond repair. Billions of refugees crowded into whatever vessels still worked. "They're barely holding on," Jake reported to the War Council. "The Devourers consumed their homeworld so fast that most species couldn't evacuate. What we're seeing is all that's left of dozens of civilizations." "What about their military capabilities?" General Sullivan asked. "Almost gone. They lost their main fleets in the first attacks. The survivors are mostly civilian ships with minimal weapons. They're counting on us to stop the Devourers." President Karen Walsh, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Then we won't let them down. Admiral Taylor, how many ships do we have ready?" 50 warships, Madam President, all armed with the new kinetic weapons. We've also converted 100 civilian ships to carry supplies and support equipment. That's not enough, Jake said. The aliens estimate there are thousands of Devourer ships. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. Then we'll have to be smarter, Kate said. Dr. Chen, what else have you learned about these creatures? Tony pulled up another hologram. The Devourers operate as a hive mind. All their ships are connected through some kind of psychic network. They share information instantly across vast distances. That sounds like a disadvantage for us, Rick pointed out. Not necessarily. Dr. Lisa Hayes has been working with the alien survivors to understand how this network operates. She thinks we might be able to turn it against them. Lisa Hayes had been studying alien psychology and communication for months. She had worked closely with the survivors, learning their languages and understanding their cultures. Now she was working on something that could save them all. The hive mind is their strength, Lisa explained to the council. But it's also their weakness. If we can disrupt the network, we can cause chaos in their ranks. How? President Walsh asked. We create a virus. Not a biological virus, but a mental one. A pattern of information that causes errors in their psychic network. If we can inject it into even one Devourer ship, it will spread through their entire fleet. Will it kill them? Better. It will drive them insane. They'll start attacking each other instead of us. Admiral Taylor leaned forward. How do we deliver this virus? We need to get close enough to one of their ships to make direct contact. That means someone has to fly right up to a Devourer Titan and download the virus into their systems. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. It was a suicide mission. I'll do it, Jake said immediately. No, Kate replied. We need you to coordinate the fleet. I'll assign the mission to someone else. With respect, General, this is my responsibility. I made contact with the aliens first. I promised them we would help. President Walsh made the final decision. Captain Morrison will lead the attack fleet, but he won't be flying the suicide mission. We'll find volunteers. Within hours, hundreds of pilots had volunteered for the mission. Everyone knew the odds. Everyone knew most of them wouldn't come home. But they also knew that if they didn't try, the galaxy would fall to the Devourers. The first test of human weapons came in the Vega system. Commander Steve Carter led a small force of 10 ships against a single Devourer Titan. The alien survivors watched from a safe distance as the human ships opened fire. The kinetic projectiles struck the Devourer's armor with tremendous force. For the first time in months, alien sensors registered damage to a Devourer ship. The dark armor cracked and split. Nuclear fire bloomed against the creature's hull. But the Titan was huge, and it took dozens of hits before it finally died. The human fleet lost 3 ships in the battle, their crews giving their lives to prove that the Devourers could be killed. When news of the victory reached the refugee fleets, something amazing happened. For the first time since the war began, the aliens started to hope. They had seen the impossible. A Devourer Titan, one of the unstoppable monsters that had consumed their worlds, lay dead in space. Captain Morrison sent a message to all the surviving alien fleets. This is the Terran fleet. We remember the compact. We are here to fight. But even as hope began to spread, everyone knew the real battle was just beginning. The Devourers had thousands of ships, and humanity had barely proven they could destroy one. The war for the galaxy's survival was only starting. 6 months after the first human victory, the war had spread across the galaxy. Commander Rachel Stone gripped the controls of her fighter as she dove toward the massive Devourer ship. Behind her, 5 other human pilots followed in formation. They called themselves the Reapers, and they had one job: get close enough to hurt the enemy. Target locked, Rachel said into her radio. Beginning attack run. Her fighter was packed with explosives. Not fancy alien technology, but good old human nuclear bombs. The plan was simple. Fly straight at the Devourer ship, get as close as possible, then detonate everything at once. The Devourer's weapons fired at them, beams of dark energy that could cut through the strongest alien armor. But Rachel's ship was small and fast. She twisted through the enemy fire, her heart pounding, as death missed her by inches. "Almost there," she told her squadron. "Remember, we only get one shot at this." The Devourer ship grew larger in her view screen. It was the size of a city, covered in the same dark armor that had defeated so many alien fleets. But humans had learned something important. The armor was strongest against energy weapons. Physical impacts could still hurt it. "Now!" Rachel shouted. All 6 fighters fired their nuclear missiles at the same time. The weapons struck the Devourer's hull and exploded in brilliant flashes of light. When the fire cleared, a huge hole had been torn in the enemy ship's side. "Direct hit," Rachel's wingman called out. "The beast is wounded." But the Devourer wasn't dead. It began to turn toward them, its weapons charging for another attack. Rachel knew they had seconds before it would fire again. "All ships, fall back to the fleet," she ordered. "We've done our job." The human fleet was waiting 10,000 miles away. 50 warships armed with the kinetic weapons that Dr. Chen had designed. Admiral Ben Taylor watched from the bridge of the flagship as the fighters returned. "All ships, open fire," he commanded. The fleet launched a barrage of metal projectiles at the wounded Devourer. Each projectile was the size of a car and moved at nearly the speed of light. They slammed into the creature's damaged hull with tremendous force. The Devourer ship began to break apart. For the second time in the war, humans had killed one of the giant creatures. But this time they had done it with fewer losses. Only one fighter had been destroyed in the attack. "Signal the alien fleets," Admiral Taylor ordered. "Tell them the Proxima system is clear." The victory at Proxima was just one of many battles being fought across the galaxy. Human fleets had spread out to help the alien survivors wherever they could. Each battle taught them something new about fighting the Devourers. Captain Dan Brooks commanded the UES Vengeance, one of the newest human warships. He had been fighting the Devourers for months, and he had learned to think like them. The creatures were smart, but they followed patterns. They could be tricked. "Enemy ships approaching," his tactical officer reported. 3 Devourer Titans plus escort vessels. Dan smiled. 3 Titans was a lot, but he had a plan. "Launch the decoy drones. Make them think we're retreating." The Vengeance fired a spread of small drones that looked like human ships on enemy sensors. The drones fled toward a nearby asteroid field, broadcasting fake distress signals. The Devourers took the bait. They chased the drones into the asteroid field, thinking they were pursuing the human fleet. But Dan had been preparing this trap for weeks. "Detonate the mines," he ordered. The asteroid field exploded. Dan's engineers had spent days planting nuclear mines throughout the area. When they all went off at once, the blast was visible from 3 star systems away. 2 of the Devourer Titans were destroyed instantly. The third was badly damaged, its armor cracked and broken. The human fleet moved in for the kill. "This is for Earth," Dan said as his ship fired the final shot. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amy Foster had been studying the ancient ruins on Earth, trying to understand humanity's forgotten past. Deep beneath the Sahara Desert, she found something that changed everything. "It's a map," she explained to the Emergency Council on Earth. "Not just any map. It shows the location of the original prison where the Devourers were locked away 50,000 years ago." President Walsh leaned forward. "Where is it?" "The Galactic Core. There's some kind of ancient machine there built by the old Alliance. If we can reach it, we might be able to trap the Devourers again." General Kate Sullivan studied the star charts. "The Galactic Core is heavily defended. The Devourers have their largest fleets there. It would take everything we have to fight through." "Then that's what we'll do," the president said. "We'll commit our entire fleet to one final battle." The plan was ambitious and dangerous. Every human warship would join the attack. Every pilot, every soldier, every weapon humanity had built would be thrown into one massive assault on the Galactic Core. Admiral Taylor would lead the fleet personally. Captain Morrison would command the assault force. Dr. Chen would bring his team to operate the ancient machine. and Dr. Hayes would carry the psychic virus that could disrupt the devourer hive mind. "This is it," Admiral Taylor told the fleet commanders. "We either win this battle, or we lose everything. The aliens are counting on us. Earth is counting on us. The future of the galaxy is in our hands." The human fleet assembled at the edge of the galactic core. 300 warships, the largest military force humanity had ever created. Alongside them flew the surviving alien vessels, battered but still fighting. Admiral Zexathara, recovered from his injuries, commanded the alien ships. "Terrans," he said over the radio, 50,000 years ago, your ancestors saved the galaxy. Today, we fight together again." The battle began with a surprise. The Devourers had been expecting the attack. Thousands of their ships waited in formation around the galactic core. The ancient machine that could trap them was protected by the largest concentration of enemy forces anyone had ever seen. "All ships attack formation," Admiral Taylor ordered. "Remember, we only need to get one ship through to the machine. Everyone else fights to give them that chance." The human fleet charged into the enemy formation. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Nuclear fire bloomed against the darkness of space. Kinetic weapons tore through Devourer armor. Human ships rammed into enemy vessels when their weapons ran out. Commander Lisa Martinez piloted her destroyer straight into a cluster of Devourer fighters. Her ship was already damaged, her crew dead or dying. But she had one last weapon to use. "For humanity," she whispered as she activated her ship's nuclear self-destruct. The explosion took out a dozen enemy ships and cleared a path for the assault force. Captain Morrison's ship raced through the gap, heading for the ancient machine at the galactic core. But the Devourers weren't finished. Their largest ship, a monster the size of a moon, moved to intercept Morrison's vessel. Its weapons could destroy a planet with a single shot. "I'm not going to make it," Morrison told Admiral Taylor over the radio. "Yes, you are," Taylor replied. "All ships protect the assault force, whatever it takes." The human fleet threw itself between Morrison and the giant Devourer ship. Ships exploded and died, but they bought precious seconds for Morrison to reach his target. At the galactic core, the ancient machine waited. It had been built by the First Alliance, the one that included humanity's ancestors. For 50,000 years, it had waited for someone to return and use it again. Dr. Chen's team worked frantically to activate the machine while the battle raged around them. "I've got it," Chen shouted over the noise. "The machine is powering up." But they needed more time. The Devourers were closing in and the human fleet was running out of ships to sacrifice. "Deploy the virus," Morrison ordered Dr. Hayes. "It's our only chance." Hayes connected her equipment to the ancient machine. The psychic virus, months in development, began to spread through the Devourer hive mind. Across the galaxy, enemy ships began to malfunction as their shared consciousness turned against itself. "It's working," Hayes reported. "The Devourers are fighting each other." The tide of battle shifted. With their hive mind in chaos, the Devourers could no longer coordinate their attacks. Human ships pressed their advantage, fighting with desperate courage. But the largest Devourer ship was still functional, still heading toward the ancient machine. Morrison knew there was only one way to stop it. "All ships, this is Morrison. I'm going to ram the big one. Tell Earth we kept our promise." "Negative," Admiral Taylor replied. "We'll find another way." But Morrison had already made his decision. He turned his ship toward the giant Devourer and pushed his engines to maximum power. The collision lit up the galactic core like a new star. The explosion from Captain Morrison's sacrifice lit up the entire galactic core. The giant Devourer ship broke apart in a shower of metal and fire. But even as it died, more enemy vessels moved to attack the ancient machine. Admiral Ben Taylor watched from his damaged flagship as the battle raged around the mysterious device. Half of his fleet was gone. Ships drifted through space, their hulls cracked open, their crews dead. But they had bought enough time for Dr. Chen and his team to activate the machine. "Status report," Taylor called to the landing team. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "The machine is online, but it needs someone to operate it. The ancient Records say it requires a conscious mind to maintain the prison. Someone has to stay connected to it forever. Taylor felt his heart sink. They had come so far, sacrificed so much, only to learn that victory required one more sacrifice. Someone would have to give up their life to keep the Devourers trapped. "I'll do it," Taylor said without hesitation. "No, sir," came a voice from the alien fleet. It was Admiral Zex Thara. "This burden should not fall on humanity alone. My people started this war by failing to keep the prison secure. Let me take responsibility." Other voices joined in. The Valorian Admiral, the surviving Ethereal Council member, representatives from every species that still lived. They all volunteered to stay with the machine, to become eternal guardians of the Devourer prison. "We'll share the duty," Zexathara said. "No one person should bear this alone. We'll take turns supporting each other through the ages." As the volunteers prepared to connect to the ancient machine, the battle continued around them. The psychic virus Dr. Hayes had created was spreading through the Devourer fleet, but many ships were still fighting. The largest concentration of enemy forces was gathering for one final attack. Commander Steve Carter piloted his fighter through the chaos. His ship had been hit 3 times, and his left engine was failing. But he could see the enemy formation massing near the machine. If they destroyed it now, everything would be lost. "All remaining fighters, form up on me," Carter called to his squadron. "We're going to hit them with everything we have." Only 12 fighters answered his call. 12 ships against hundreds of Devourer vessels. The odds were impossible, but Carter had learned something during the war. Humans didn't give up. They found a way to win even when winning seemed impossible. "Remember," he told his pilots, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species in the galaxy, for every child who deserves to grow up free." The fighters dove toward the enemy formation. Devourer weapons lit up space around them, but the pilots twisted and turned through the deadly fire. They had learned to think like their enemy, to predict where the shots would come from. Carter's fighter shook as enemy fire grazed his wing. He was running out of ammunition, running out of time. In the distance, he could see the largest Devourer ship turning toward the ancient machine. "I'm out of missiles," one of his pilots reported. "Then ram them," Carter replied. "Do whatever it takes." One by one, the human fighters spent their lives to protect the machine. They crashed into enemy ships, detonated their fuel tanks, used their own bodies as weapons. Each sacrifice bought a few more seconds for the machine to complete its work. Dr. Hayes watched from the control room as the prison began to activate. Reality itself seemed to bend around the ancient device. Space and time twisted into new shapes. The Devourers, sensing what was happening, screamed across their psychic network. "It's working," Hayes reported. "The prison is opening, but we need more time." Admiral Taylor made a decision that would define his legacy. "All ships, final attack, protect the machine at all costs." The remaining human vessels charged toward the enemy fleet. There were only 50 ships left against thousands of Devourers, but they had something the enemy didn't understand. They had hope. The UES Hammer, Colonel Barnes' flagship, led the charge. Its hull was scarred from dozens of battles, its crew exhausted from months of fighting. But when Barnes saw the Devourer ships closing on the machine, he knew what had to be done. "Engine room, give me everything you've got," he ordered. The Hammer accelerated toward the largest enemy formation. Its nuclear-tipped kinetic weapons fired continuously, tearing holes in the Devourer ranks. Other human ships followed, their crews singing ancient battle songs as they faced certain death. Behind them, the alien survivors joined the attack. Keth Mori crystal ships that glowed like stars, Valorian energy vessels that blazed with inner fire, even the damaged ethereal mine ships, their occupants using their last strength to shield the human fleet from enemy attacks. The battle became a storm of light and fury. Ships exploded and died, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Each destroyed Devourer was one less monster threatening the galaxy. At the ancient machine, the volunteers prepared for their eternal duty. Admiral Zexathara placed his hand on the control interface first. Energy flowed through him as his mind connected to the device. "I can feel them," he said. "The Devourers. They're being pulled back into the prison dimension." Admiral Taylor joined him at the controls, then the Valorian Admiral and the ethereal representative. One by one, volunteers from every surviving species linked themselves to the machine. Their minds became part of the prison, eternal guardians who would ensure the Devourers never escaped again. As the prison activated, the effect was immediate. Across the galaxy, Devourer ships began to fade and disappear. They were being pulled back into the dimension where they had been trapped for 50,000 years. Their screams of rage echoed through space as they vanished into the void. The last Devourer ship disappeared just as Commander Carter's fighter ran out of fuel. He drifted in space, watching the ancient machine pulse with energy. The prison was sealed. The galaxy was safe. "This is Admiral Taylor," came a voice over the radio. "The Devourers are contained. The war is over." Silence fell across the galactic core. Then, slowly, cheers began to echo from every surviving ship. Human voices mixed with alien songs of victory. They had done the impossible. They had saved the galaxy, but the cost had been terrible. Billions of beings were dead. Entire species had been wiped out. Dozens of worlds were empty, their populations consumed by the enemy. The survivors gathered on a world they named New Haven. It was a planet that humanity had been terraforming when the war began. Now it became the meeting place for the new Galactic Alliance. President Walsh addressed the assembly of survivors. Representatives from 12 species sat together, planning for a future they had almost lost. "We gather here not to celebrate," Walsh said, "but to remember. 12 billion beings died in this war. We will never forget their sacrifice." Dr. Lisa Hayes had prepared a memorial archive, a massive database containing the name of every person who had died. Human names mixed with alien designations. Each entry represented a life cut short, a dream ended. But from the ashes of the old galaxy, something new was growing. The survivors were working together in ways that had never been possible before. Kethmori engineers worked alongside human scientists. Valorian artists collaborated with human musicians. The trauma of war had brought the species together. Captain Y, Dan Brooks, now promoted to admiral, led the first joint exploration mission into unexplored space. His crew included members from 6 different species, all working toward a common goal. They had learned that diversity made them stronger. As the years passed, the galaxy began to heal. New colonies were established. Children were born who would never know the terror of the Devourers. Trade routes reopened. Art and science flourished again. At the galactic core, the ancient machine continued its work. The volunteer guardians took turns maintaining the prison, ensuring that the Devourers remained trapped. Sometimes they would speak to each other across the psychic link, sharing stories of the worlds they had saved. Admiral Taylor often thought about Captain Morrison and the others who had died to make victory possible. Their sacrifice had meaning now. The galaxy was free because they had been willing to give everything. On Earth, a monument was built in honor of all who had fought. The inscription was simple. They answered the call. A young cadet named Lucy. Chen stood before the monument reading the names of the dead. Her grandfather had been Dr. Tony Chen, one of the scientists who had developed the weapons that defeated the Devourers. Why did they do it? She asked her instructor, an old veteran of the war. The instructor looked at the monument, remembering friends who had died among the stars. Because someone had to, he said, and they were there. Years later, when alien children asked their parents about the war, they would hear the same story. How the galaxy had faced its darkest hour, how hope had almost died, and how humanity, the forgotten species from a small world, had remembered an ancient promise and kept it. The Terrans had answered the call, and the galaxy was free.